Today we're going to go over a little primer on something called media effects, which is pretty self-explanatory. It is the effect that media can have on people, the effect that communication from us as health professionals can have on individuals. And I think it's helpful to have a little bit of a grounding in the history of this field in order to understand how far we've come, kind of from the horse and buggy all the way up to the space shuttle in terms of changing theory over time, and also to gain some appreciation for some of the work that's come before and how it may still, in fact, possibly apply to some of the stuff that we're doing today. I'm going to gloss over a lot of the detail of the history just to give you a big picture. And the most important point probably to remember is that over time, media effects theory has changed. It's kind of gone from what we term a powerful effects model to a more limited effects model. What do I mean by that? Well, we started off with communication research in the 1930s, a lot of it based on research into propaganda. There was a lot of concern, of course, in the build-up to World War II about the effect that propaganda could have on people. And many of the scholars concluded that, in fact, media could have a pretty powerful effect on people. Over time, that belief and that scholarship has fluctuated. It was immediately followed by a group of scholars who said, wait a minute, media really has minimal effect on people. People are pretty active and resistant to this kind of thing. And then it went back to not so minimal effects. And now finally we're in more of a phase where people see media and communication as having more of a limited effect, but an effect within a context that individuals fit into. So I want to go over a few of the details here, but basically this is a chart that brings us from the 1930s up until the present day. So talking about direct effects, I think it's most helpful if you remember a couple of the names that direct effects theories were sort of known by, are still known by today. Two of those terms were the magic bullet or the hypodermic needle theory. Think of it in terms of somebody coming along with a syringe. The syringe is a message. They shoot you in the arm with it, and boom, you're going to do whatever the message says. That is the hypodermic needle theory in essence. Now, of course, that assumes that communication has an immediate effect and unmediated, in other words, not affected by anything else, not moderated by anything else, effect on people. And if that were true entirely, then we could probably all pack up and go home, because we could just brainwash people into good health by giving them a message and being pretty certain that they were going to follow whatever advice we had for them. This was not found to be true in most aspects of media. We certainly know it's not true in public health. Just telling somebody something doesn't ensure that they're going to follow our recommendation. So that brings us to minimal effects in terms of the timeline of communication research. There followed a group of people who said, look, people do whatever they want. And in fact, this was based on research that showed that advertising in some recent elections had no influence on people at the polls. It didn't matter what they had seen, what kind of message they had heard. They voted in whatever way they want. And it was also true of some advertising messages, that they simply weren't effective for people. So but it didn't mean that communication had no importance. The idea was that there were, in fact, influential people out there, opinion leaders, and that they were really the ones who counted with most individuals, that they were going to get these messages, they were going to interpret them and pass them on to people. It was something that was known as two-step flow, and the idea behind this from a communication perspective was that maybe we should just target these opinion leaders and then they would sort of get the word out for us. That was followed by a group of researchers who said, wait a minute, there are effects, and they are not so minimal. And some of that research was the stuff that you listened to in the other video. It was talking about agenda setting and priming, and there was a lot of good research to back that up as well. The quote that I think most effectively sums up the idea of agenda setting is that media may not tell people what to think about, what to think, but it tells them what to think about. So media is not going to actually have this hypodermic needle effect on people, but it is going to tell them what's important and maybe influence them in some way. Now, there were other researchers, a guy named George Gerbner was sort of the leader of these, who went even further, and they said, well, there's something called cultivation that happens when people are exposed to a lot of media. In fact, it's going to have an even stronger effect among people who watch or consume a lot of media, and those people are going to be very heavily influenced by whatever they see, hear, or read. And Gerbner and his scholars were most concerned about the growing influence at the time in the 1960s of television. And they did quite a bit of research, many years of research on cultivation theory. How much does watching TV change people's attitudes, opinions, and behaviors? They came up with some things like the idea of mean world syndrome. I always love to describe this because it's such an apt term, but the idea was that if people see stuff on television over and over again, like see really negative stuff in the news, they may come to see the world as just as mean as it appears to be on TV. Taking that a step further is the idea of mainstreaming, that if people see something portrayed over and over again, they may come to think of it as normal. So on the negative side, that could be if they see violence portrayed over and over again, they could come to think of that as normal. On the positive side, perhaps for us in health communication, you might think of, the more television shows that people see in which people use condoms before they have sex, then they will come to think of that as normal. So that would be an example of mainstreaming. There were also a lot of folks in the social cognitive theory camp who said that media and communication can have a big effect on people, sort of depending on what they observe and what the anticipated response or effect of that behavior is. And you can think about Bandura and all of his research on social cognitive theory. Think back to the experiment he did where he showed kids the videos of people punching the clown dolls, Bobo the Clown, and then the kids acted out more violent behavior on the playground after that. That's an example of the not so minimal effects school of theory. Following that, though, people have said, there are certainly times when maybe cultivation is happening, maybe observation and social learning theory is creating behavior in people after they've seen something or heard a message. But there are also some limitations. There are some other influences. In fact, everything happens within a context. And the idea here is that people are subject to many different influences. I mean, it's not just what they see on television or what they read on a billboard or what they hear a friend say at a party or what is circulating on social media. It's all of those things at once. And there's this multi-step flow. People receive a message, they filter it and pass it on, and it's happening all over the place all the time. The other part of that is that people may be subject to many of the same influences, but they would be differentially influenced by those communications, those messages, depending on what else is happening in the social context, socially and structurally. And you can kind of think of that as being somewhat similar to the way we think about the social ecological model in health behavior, and the idea that that every individual is not an island, but that they are sort of surrounded by a lot of other influences and factors that we need to take into account. So what does all this mean for us as health communication scholars? Well, I'd like you to think a little bit about whether you agree or disagree with some of these ways of conceptualizing the way media and communication can affect people, the impact that we can have as communicators. Think also about whether or not all of these old ideas are entirely outdated. Maybe you will think they are, maybe you won't think so. Are there certain contexts where they might still apply? And finally, as a health communicator, now thinking about the power that the media has and the power that it doesn't have. What does that mean for us, and how should that change the way that we plan and disseminate our messages and try to change behaviors? So think about those questions, and I will see you guys in class. Thanks.